So, a couple of you have asked about what kind of weapons and mods I suggest using on the Rift Magician, and, well, honestly, the weapons talk is something that's both fun and fairly easy to do, so here you go, 2 videos on Limbo and weapons, starting with a general explanation of what weapon types Limbo can use. Anyways, Limbo can be used with anything. In the video. Alright, that is true, but there are some things that I can suggest above the others, and some that I'd suggest passing over for high-level content because they will quickly become somewhat hard to use effectively. For instance, let's talk about anything that requires both sustained accuracy and short range. In other words, a lot of beam weapons. The vast majority of these will have the same issue when playing Limbo. He just really isn't built to use them in high-level combat. Unless he is healing up off of Life Strike or something, Limbo is just too squishy to stand around in short-range combat at higher levels, and keeping any sort of tight beam locked onto the target kind of requires that. However, he is not as gimped by this issue as some other squishy frames like Mag, since he can now use beams inside of the Void, and so if he wants he can just dump his opponents into the Rift, stasis them, and headshot them to death. In addition, he can use Rift Torrent to boost a beam's DPS, which can make up for their low initial damage. But outside of the Void, beam weapons will start to have some pretty big issues after a bit, and I still can't really suggest them for use in the Void because, well, why not just stab an enemy or use a more ammo-efficient weapon like a sniper rifle? Speaking of snipers, one very general sort of weapon that I can suggest using on Limbo are burst damage weapons. Not burst fire ones, though those are actually pretty solid on him, but rather any sort of front-loaded damage weapons such as shotguns, semi-automatic rifles, sniper rifles, and even explosives can be quite good on Limbo. They synergize very well with his Cataclysm, allowing him to simply pop out, blast an enemy, and then step back into a safety zone, or instantly nuke anything that's stupid enough to step across that border. And they work just as well with Rift Walk. He can dash out of the Void, blast something, and then slip back in it if he needs, and he can also safely move to whatever distance his weapon's best at any time. So, yeah, burst damage weapons are probably the ones that fit the Rift Magician the best. But this doesn't actually mean he's bad with sustained damage. It's perfectly fine to take a Prisma Gorgon or a Stradivar or whatever assault rifle you like and fight from medium to long range, or get closer with a monster like the Comb and just maul through enemies. As long as you don't need to worry about limiting your mobility at semi-close range if you want to do good damage, you really can use pretty much anything you'd like. It's just that when you combine a need for accuracy and low range, that Limbo runs into some pretty big issues due to having the overall durability of a wet paper bag. Oh, and one final thing to mention that's specific to ranged weaponry. Since Limbo can just drop into the Void to reload, reload speed matters far less than on other frames. Even if you have a 5-second reload thanks to a Riven, you can just slip into the Void and take all the time you need without any actual risk of being harmed. This doesn't mean that I actually suggest weapons with awful reload speeds, but it is something to keep in mind if you enjoy weapons with slower reloads like the Sobek, the Core, and Thor the Prisma Gorgon. As for melee weapons, this is again something that changes a lot depending on what sort of playstyle you're going for. If you're using Rift Torrent, you can make long-range weapons amazing even if they're quick and don't normally hit hard. If you're using Stasis, how fast or not the weapon is simply does not matter. You can easily go in with a Fragger Prime with no speed mods and squish things if you'd like. But if you don't want to rely on the Void too much, then weapons that are quick and don't lock you into a relatively long animation are probably going to be ideal. Even though you can make Limbo surprisingly hard to kill with the right mod setup, if you're too slow on your swings, the enemy will eventually reach a point where they can just burst you down before you can life strike, or at least force you into a stagger if you are using quick thinking. Speaking of life strike, there's one final thing I need to say, and some of this applies to both ranged and melee weaponry. Limbo gets a lot out of damage over time effects. When fighting at short range, Limbo has enough spare energy with most of his playstyles to just not care much about channeling cost, which means that you can apply life strike on the majority of your melee attacks. And as those who've watched my earlier videos know, damage over time effects caused by life strike can heal you. Even if you aren't making a life siphon, the extra healing ticks from hitting an enemy are just a solid way to help make up for your relatively low HP. Additionally, damage over time effects are extended forever when using Stasis, which means you can do things like tap anything that steps into your Cataclysm with a dot and then leave them. They'll die eventually as long as Stasis stays up. And that's basically all I have to say in this video. While you can make anything work with certain setups, the closer you are, the longer you get locked into animations, and the more time you spend with the cursor on the target, the more you're going to have to adjust your playstyle to make up for Limbo's low health. Which means that if all weapons are equal in overall effectiveness, he is probably most naturally suited to using sniper rifles than other long-range weapons, normal shotguns, automatic shotguns, assault rifles, and finally beams of various sorts. However, remember that, well, not all weapons are equal. Rivens throw that equality even further out of whack. The list I mentioned is just a loose guide to keep in mind, and most importantly, pick what you enjoy. You enjoying the game is the most important thing, and you can make anything work with the Rift Magician at any realistic level if you are willing to change your playstyle to make up for some of its issues. Anyways, if you're curious about what my own arsenal is like, please check out the other video I uploaded today. But since a lot of weapons that I use have rivens for them, it's more of a showcase of how broad Limbo's options are than a straight up list of suggestions. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in a bit longer than I would like. Unfortunately, I am heading out of town soon and will not have access to my computer. So it will probably be a couple of weeks before the next video is out. I had wanted to get this set done and the build one done before I left, but unfortunately time limitations, a script that absolutely refused to sit right, over-ambition, and a lot of other chaos kind of killed my plans for the build set until I get back in town. I should be able to get it out fairly soon after I get back, but yeah, I'm sorry, but it's still going to be a bit. Anyways, I will see y'all again as soon as I can. Farewell.